Era had never imagined that the most beautiful day of her life would also become the day she learned who she truly was. Because sometimes, the people who look the happiest on the outside are hiding the loneliest hearts. And sometimes, kindness doesn't come from the people wearing diamonds and silk. It comes from the ones nobody even notices. Before we continue this story, if you believe in the quiet power of kindness, take a moment to hit subscribe, give this video a like, and drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. This channel, Kindness Waves, is built for people like you, people who still believe that small acts of goodness can change the world. Now, let's continue Era's story. The wedding dress was worth more than most families earned in an entire year. Ivory silk shimmered softly in the golden light of the room. Fine lace from France wrapped gently around the sleeves and neckline. Pearls were sewn carefully across the bodice. Era had counted them herself while the seamstresses worked for months. There were 47 pearls, each one placed by hand, each one shining like a tiny star. Whenever she moved, the long train flowed behind her like a cloud. It had been so wide and heavy that 3 bridesmaids had carried it down the aisle at St. James's Church earlier that day. Era had felt like a queen. All her life, she had imagined this moment. As a little girl, she had dreamed of wearing white silk and walking toward the man she loved. Today, that dream had come true. Julian Alaric had returned to London after years away, and he had chosen her. The ceremony had been magnificent. 200 of the most powerful families in London had filled the church. Gentlemen in dark coats and ladies in bright gowns had watched as Era walked slowly down the aisle toward the most handsome man in the room. Julian had looked at her with such intensity that her heart had nearly stopped beating. His dark eyes had seemed full of devotion. When he spoke his vows, his voice had been deep and emotional. Several women in the church had wiped tears from their eyes because the moment looked so beautiful. Era had believed every word he said. After the ceremony, their carriage had carried them through the streets of London to his grand townhouse in Mayfair. The reception that followed was even more dazzling than the wedding itself. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls. Long tables were covered in white linen and gold trim, filled with roasted meats, imported wines, and towers of pastries. A string quartet played softly in the corner while guests laughed and clinked their glasses. Era moved through the crowd in her heavy silk gown, smiling, nodding, thanking people for their kind words. But somewhere beneath the smile, a small ache had begun to grow. She could not explain it. She had everything a woman could dream of, and yet something inside her felt strangely hollow. It was near the back of the grand hall, close to the kitchen doors, that Era first noticed her. A young woman, perhaps only 19, stood quietly against the wall in a plain gray dress with a white apron. She was one of the hired kitchen staff, brought in for the night to help serve the endless trays of food. Her name, Era would later learn, was Nell. Nell's hands were red and cracked from hours of washing dishes and carrying heavy trays. Her shoes were worn thin at the soles. She did not look at the guests. She kept her eyes down, moving quickly and quietly, careful not to draw attention to herself. Era might never have noticed her at all, except for one small moment. A drunken guest, a wealthy lord who had clearly had too much wine, stumbled backward and knocked an entire tray of crystal glasses out of Nell's hands. The glasses shattered across the marble floor with a sound so loud that half the room turned to look. The lord laughed carelessly and walked away without a word of apology, leaving Nell alone on her knees, gathering the broken pieces with trembling fingers while whispers and quiet laughter rippled through the crowd. Era felt something twist inside her chest. Without thinking, she lifted the heavy train of her wedding gown, the very dress worth more than most families earned a year, and walked straight through the crowd toward the young woman. Gasps rose around her. A bride, on her wedding night, kneeling on the floor. Julian's mother nearly fainted at the sight. But Era did not care. She knelt down beside Nell, ignoring the delicate lace and pearls that now pressed against the cold, wine-stained floor, and began helping her pick up the broken glass. "You don't have to do that, my lady," Nell whispered, her voice shaking with embarrassment. "Please, you'll ruin your dress." Era looked at her gently. "A dress can be cleaned," she said softly. "But nobody should ever have to feel this small on a night when everyone else is celebrating." For a moment, the entire room fell silent. Era helped Nell gather every last piece of glass, then reached for a nearby napkin and wrapped it gently around Nell's cut finger, one that had been bleeding quietly the whole time. She asked one of the footmen to bring a chair and told Nell to sit and rest for a few minutes. Then, in front of 200 of London's wealthiest guests, Era did something no one expected. She raised her voice, calm but clear, and said, "Tonight, everyone who has worked to make this wedding beautiful, every cook, every server, every hand that carried a tray, will eat from this same table before the night ends. No one should serve a celebration of love while going hungry themselves." There was a stunned pause. Then, slowly, applause began to ripple through the room. Not everyone understood why a bride in a French silk gown was suddenly serving kindness instead of expecting service. But something about the sincerity in her voice moved people. Julien, watching from across the room, looked at his new wife with an expression that was difficult to read, somewhere between confusion and quiet admiration. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the candles had burned low, Era found herself sitting outside on the back steps of the grand townhouse, still in her wedding gown, now stained at the knees. Nell approached her shyly, carrying 2 cups of tea. "I made this for the staff," Nell said, "but I thought maybe you'd like one too. It's not fancy, just simple tea." Era smiled and accepted the cup. They sat together in silence for a while, 2 women from entirely different worlds, sharing a quiet moment beneath the London sky. "Why did you do that?" Nell finally asked. "Nobody like you has ever done that before. Most people don't even see us." Era thought about the question for a long moment before answering. "My mother used to say that kindness costs nothing, but it can mean everything to someone who is struggling," she said softly. "I grew up with very little, Nell. Before I married into this world, my family didn't have much more than what we could grow in our small garden. I remember what it felt like to be invisible to people who had everything. I promised myself that if I ever had the chance to be different, I would be." Nell's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "Tonight, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible." That single moment, small as it seemed, would ripple far beyond that one night. Word of what Era had done spread quickly through London society, not just as gossip, but as inspiration. Other wealthy families began inviting their household staff to share in family celebrations. Charities saw a rise in donations. A group of young debutantes even started a small initiative delivering food to the poor each week, inspired directly by what they had witnessed at that wedding. Nell herself, given a small opportunity by Era in the months that followed, was eventually trained as a seamstress's apprentice, the very trade that had created Era's own wedding gown. Within a few years, Nell had her own small shop, one where she made simple, beautiful dresses for working families who could never have afforded French lace, but who deserved to feel beautiful all the same. As for Era and Julien, their marriage, like most, had its struggles and its joys, its quiet mornings and difficult nights. But Era never lost the part of herself that had knelt on that marble floor in her wedding gown. She often said, years later, that the most important vow she made that day wasn't spoken at the altar in front of 200 guests, but whispered quietly on her knees beside a stranger who needed someone to see her. This story is a reminder to all of us. In a world where we chase success, wealth, beauty, and status, it is easy to forget the people standing quietly at the edges of our lives, the ones serving, the ones struggling, the ones who feel unseen. True greatness is not measured by how expensive our wedding dress is or how many powerful people fill the room. It is measured by whether we notice the person nobody else notices. It is measured by whether we are willing to kneel down, even in our finest moment, to lift someone else up. Kindness does not require wealth. It does not require a title or a grand stage. It simply requires a willing heart and open eyes. Era had everything money could buy that day, and yet the moment she would be remembered for was the one that cost her nothing but a little dignity and a little time. So if you take one thing away from this story, let it be this. You never know how much your kindness might mean to someone else. A small gesture, a kind word, a moment of noticing someone who feels invisible, it could change the course of their entire life. You do not need to wait for a grand occasion to be kind. Every single day gives you a chance to kneel down for someone else, to lift them up, to remind them that they matter. If this story touched your heart today, share it with someone who needs a little reminder that kindness still lives in this world. Subscribe to Kindness Waves for more stories like this one. Stories that remind us of the good still hiding in ordinary moments. And remember, no matter how small the act may seem, kindness always leaves a mark that lasts far longer than any pearl, any silk, or any diamond ever could.